Hey team! Today I am just going to discuss one little thing that is actually very, very important in your aerial training is breathing. So we're not going to do any particular physical exercise for this mini lesson, as I call it. We are just going to try and bring awareness to different type of breath that we can apply in our aerial training. So there's a few things when you breathe that can happen when you do aerial. Very often we find ourselves holding our breath, we find ourselves struggling to breathe, and we find ourselves not understanding which part of our body we should actually be engaging in the breath, okay? So first of all, when we breathe, we have different parts of the body when we breathe in general, right? We can bring the breath into the belly, which often you can do in terms of relaxation. In yoga in particular, you probably will often work that with a slow breath, a slow and intentional breath. We also have the breath that's called diaphragmatic breath, which we like to include a lot in Pilates training, which means of expanding the diaphragm and also helping with core bracing a little bit more into that pelvic floor engagement. The last part of the breath that we often discuss as well is the collarbone and the upper lung breath. It's a breath that very often is not recommended to use at any point, and also it's a breath that's often associated with stress and anxiety, and often when people have anxiety attacks, or for example, I know when I have a panic attack, I tend to do some collarbone tapping and focusing on bringing my breath a bit more into my diaphragm and my belly. The reason being that we only fill up the air into the top of our lungs instead of actually bringing the air using as much as possible of the volume of our lungs, which is what the diaphragm job is to do. So how do we think about all these elements in aerial? First of all, if you're the kind of person that tends to block your breath, it's not uncommon when we do a strenuous pose or when we want to hold a pose that is actually quite difficult for us to hold the breath, all right? It's actually, we've all been in this situation. I still happen to be in this situation. And quite frankly, I have injured my obliques just before I came here to Bali. And I'm pretty certain this is because I haven't actually used the appropriate breath to do a fairly challenging move. And this is what also I want to discuss the breath pattern, because breathing is important for your nervous system to understand what you're meant to be doing. If you're not breathing properly, your nervous system very often is going to take it as a signal that something is wrong. And therefore, it is going to start a series of reactions in your body that can lead to potential injury. And this is why it's important to bring awareness to the breath. So when you hold your breath in an exercise form, whereas it's when you lift or when you do a pose in aerial, we call this the Valsalva maneuver. A lot of power lifters, a lot of heavyweight lifters, you will see them actually apply this maneuver. This is because they intentionally want to pull the blood into the area that they are working out. So it's a little bit when when you get a blood test, yeah, when you have the, I forgot the word already, but when you have the blood stopper, right? Just to kind of have it, I've got the French word, not the English word today for some reason. And you want to pull the blood into the area so they can find the veins. So the Valsalva maneuver kind of works on the same thing. It also helps with your adrenaline, your vagus nerve, kind of your sympathetic activation, and it's going to work the muscles differently. When we do this in aerial, not necessarily recommended. I would say it's not necessarily the worst thing, but there are places where you can apply it. So in terms of holding poses that require flexibility, it's usually not really recommended because you want actually the breath to flow. Like I was explaining, it's the correlation with your nervous system is that if you hold that breath, very often the nervous system is going to take this as a wrong thing and is going to start freaking out and hold on to your muscles, which can create these injuries. Valsalva maneuver can help when we want to kind of engage or contract really fast a certain muscle in particular. However, personally, I do recommend more in XL, sharp XL with a core engagement. It is quite the hard part here, is understanding when the breath should be occurring in a more parasympathetic way, like relaxed, or in a more activated way. When we move and when we do an exercise, we tend to exhale during the effort part. In aerial, it can be very difficult because we have some poses that we want to hold in place, and we have some poses where we need to actually be quite active. So understand the requirements of the breath in different poses. That's why it's important to learn to master poses step by step, and also understand the breathing requirements in each step of doing certain moves, do a certain flow and certain sequences. And for that, I do recommend that you get the help of a coach and ask them support in understanding these. What you can do at home is, when you train your flexibility, first of all, is making sure that you train a parasympathetic breath during your flexibility training. So even in contortion, that is quite an active part of flexibility training, we still want to try and train the nervous system to be more in a sympathetic state. Therefore, when you arrive this way into a flexible position where you have to hold a position that requires both flexibility, mobility, range, and activation, feeling active in your poses, you'll be more confident in holding the pose, you'll build more resilience, you'll be more stamina. But this can easily be practiced on the ground. The active part, this is why it's important to practice conditioning of the apparatus as well, and have a potential gym program, which I have on my app, the Aerial Performance Lab, because you also have to train your activation breath during the exercises. Inhale when you prepare, exhale during the effort. And this will kind of teach your body to understand when you're meant to be exhaling during the effort part, when you start coming onto your apparatus. The last thing is, obviously, you can try and train the breath like we would do in Pilates and like we would do in yoga, which means understanding and bringing awareness, because a lot of us actually struggle a lot with good diaphragmatic breath, good pelvic floor activation, engagement. And also a lot of us, when we start breathing in, we open a lot the anterior chain, we actually disengage the abdominal wall, we don't engage the pelvic floor sufficiently, and we actually struggle to breathe properly. And it's not actually engaging the muscle that you should be engaging, which is obviously your powerhouse, your core, and finding this support from your anterior chain in movements, because we kind of open the chest and the ribs flare out. So diaphragmatic breath work can actually help you expand into the back of the ribcage, and it can also help you find that exhale to lift into the pelvic floor. I've discussed the anatomy of aerial and an invert in another video, which you can obviously find wherever you're watching. So we discussed this a bit more in detail, that whole powerhouse and that whole alignment of the body. So then it's up to you to really spend time working this off the apparatus, because it's much, much more difficult and much more challenging to do that when you're on the apparatus. So I hope that this kind of quick lesson has been quite helpful for you. I think it's important for you to understand that a lot of it happens off your aerial practice, beyond your aerial practice. And that's my job. This is what I like. The part of my job is actually enjoying the process of training outside your aerial classes. So I'm here to bring you all these resources and all these like mini lessons to try and help you become a better aerialist off your apparatus. Because when you train yourself and when you start developing your skills and your expertise and your knowledge and your awareness and your education beyond the apparatus, you will start really shifting your progress and stop plateauing when you are going back to your aerial class. So I hope that's really helped. If you have any questions, please drop a comment or send me a message wherever you're watching this from. If you're on YouTube or anywhere, don't forget to follow, subscribe, and share to anyone that might find this video helpful. And I will see you in the next video, hopefully in another paradise destination. I've been very lucky to be able to travel this time around. Not been very lucky with other things like the travel can sometimes bring you, but I've been very lucky to be here, and I really hope I bring you a bit of that beautiful Bali vibe as well in those videos, and I will see you next time. Bye.